And next on our agenda for this morning is the FY20 budget overview. And we've got you slated for the next 2 hours, Ted. So hang on to your seats, and here we go.
Yeah. I'm almost surely going to be making you uncomfortable this morning.
You normally do.
We've been talking not in depth, but for a while now I've been mentioning some things, so hopefully the general idea of what we're going to be talking about today will not come to you as a surprise. But that still is going to leave us uncomfortable talking about this and thinking about this and saying where do we go from here. So today, call this the overview. We're really going to try to do two things. One is to share with you our assessment of the revenue picture, and the other is to talk, not in great depth, but on the expenditure side, just to give you some sense of some of the things we see coming, some of the things that you probably will have to deal with as you work through developing your proposed budget. So the core messages: all of our major revenues are growing more slowly than we anticipated, and we are going to have to back off of the revenue projections that are in your current 19 through 24 plan. We have limited flexibility, so every decision we make in trying to deal with these things it really becomes an important decision. Even things that seem relatively small, we have so little room, everything is big in a sense. And the pressures on our ability to maintain service levels remain. And really what I'm saying is nothing has happened in this last year to make us more comfortable. Now, those of you who heard this last year might say these core messages seem very familiar, and there's a reason for that. It's because they are exactly the same messages that I gave to you last year, which is part of this bigger picture that I'm going to be sharing today. I talked some at the chamber lunch about how some things that have been nagging at my mind for some years now have become clearer, if not clear. The world has changed. You know, the idea that we're waiting for something more to happen, I think we need to push behind us. There's nothing more coming. And that's not to say that the world can't change again. I'm not predicting that there will not be another real estate boom, or that we won't see salaries and wages starting to rise more quickly than they are. But just saying, with what we know, what we can look at now, we've gotten to where we're going. As we approach the budget, of course, we always have board goals in mind. This is always challenging for us in the budget office, because ideally what we would have is the Board of Commissioners, here are our goals. And to some extent, we have that. But often there are differing ideas among you on what you think are the highest priorities, where you want us to go. So sometimes we have a very good idea of what Commissioner Frazier wants or what Commissioner Weaver wants, but not as good an idea of what is it that the whole board wants. And anything you can do to say, as a board, this is something we want to see happen or something we don't want to see happen, that will help us develop what we're going to bring to you and get you the information that you need.
As long as you have a good idea of what I want, that's really
Yeah, and unfortunately, that thinking is not unique to you.
Straws for everyone. That's not what I want.
So my goals for today, we're basically here to set the stage for everything that's still ahead of us. We're going to be coming to you in a couple weeks with our recommendations to you. Then you'll be hearing from the agencies, and then you'll start your own deliberations on the proposed budget. This is to give you something to start thinking about. Where do you want to go? not looking for any decisions today, but any things that are coming into your mind, any ideas, any thoughts of this rather than this. Again, the more you can offer us, the better the job we can do of trying to bring you what you need. Okay, I want to look backwards just briefly. Say, we're going to be talking about where do we want to go. I think it's helpful to understand where have we been in recent years. So what we're talking about here is the 4 budgets of the 60th board. Those 4 budgets increased a total of $42.8 million, or about 11.5% increase, something less than 3% a year. Of that $42.8 million, and as I always do when I give numbers like this, it's not as simple as this makes it sound because there's a lot of other things moving in different directions behind all this. So the exact numbers here really aren't as important as just the relationships. Where were we choosing to put the money we had available? Education, that's actually public schools. Over that same period of time, got an increase of $21.4 million, half of the total increase that you had during that time. And there are people who advocate for the school system getting half of everything you have. This is just a coincidence. I am not putting this out there as an idea that it ought to work that way. The sheriff, law enforcement side, $3.8 million increase. If you include the detention center and his total operations, a $6 million increase. Total of public works, far and away the biggest department that actually reports to you, increased $5.9 million. Carroll Community College, $2.5 million. 911, $2 million. And 911, even though the transition from the state police to the sheriff as our law enforcement has been a while ago now, when we made that transition, we tried to do it with the least number of personnel in 911 that we thought we could get by to do the job. We've continued to evaluate that, and we've continued to add positions as we try to find that place that we can say, okay, we're comfortable now.
Is that 911 going to be a continuing growth, or now that we've moved on to the new, system, is that going to, are we going to see a much lower number, or what do you think?
Okay, well, now this increase is
Right.
built in now, so that's in there
Right.
forever. I think that 911 positions will continue to be a topic of conversation for you. If you spoke with them in 911, I don't believe they would say, we're comfortable that we have the staff that we need.
I guess, so this is not tied to Next Gen 911?
No.
This is tied to personnel serving the 911?
Right, that
Right.
Okay.
that
got it,
was
okay,
current level of
got it,
service.
Got it, okay.
So, yes, and Next Gen 911 will further complicate this one. Visa EMS, $1.6 million over those 4 years. And IT, this is your department again, 1.1. And I also need to point out here, there's been a significant increase in the amount of money that you're putting into IT through the capital budget as well.
On these increases, do you have an increase in what the percentage is that we give them? For other words, education, we give them X amount, but the $21.4 million is what percentage increase over that amount? Do you have that?
Yes, that will be coming up. Education, I think, was
12.5,
12.5.
2 slides from now.
Okay, so, but you have it like for education, sheriffs, public works, is all that on there for percentage? Okay.
Then looked at it another way, and this is about percent increases. There are some places where the dollars weren't as big, but the percent change was big, which is another indication of some place where you were saying this is a priority for us. Just to quickly run down those, rape crisis intervention service has gone up 88% over those 4 years. Board of Elections, 62%. This is not really a choice you made. That's the bill that the state is sending us. And a lot of that is because of early voting, additional voting site. Youth Service Bureau, 54%. This is largely about the commissioners asking YSB to be our drug treatment service provider. Human Services Program, 48%. This is largely because a few years ago, they came to us basically saying, we either need more money for running the shelters, or commissioners, you need to find another way of doing this. We chose to give them more money to keep running it. 911, 45%. Public outreach, this is our social media, TV, all the things we're doing to try and get the word out, 43%. Sheriff, just law enforcement, 36%. His total operation, 32%. Family and Children's Services, 36%, and Community College, 33%. And want to be careful, when I talk about where the dollar's gone or where have the percent changes been large, this is not with any editorial comment about was that a good decision or not. I'm just saying, here's the choices that we made. So to dive a little bit deeper, public schools, 21.4 million or 12.5%. So they grew a little bit faster than the budget as a total, but similarly. Carroll Community College. During those 4 years, what was in the plan for them would have been an $800,000 increase. You actually, over 4 years, added an additional $1.7 million for them to fund salary increases, $200,000, $500,000, $600,000, $400,000 in each of those years.
Ted, just on the Board of Education, Kerwin gave some reports, came out here. Is that going to have any impact on this budget from your point of view?
What impact it will have on this budget is still up in the air. They're debating legislation down there now, and I'm not going to predict at this point what's going to come out of that. As we look down the road, with almost total certainty, I can say, yes, this is going to have an impact on the budget, and it's probably going to be a very big impact, but we have no means of quantifying it yet.
Okay, before we get through the budget, though, you'll have a better understanding of this year's impact on that, correct?
Well, depending on how quickly they act.
Yeah.
Sine die is midnight the day before you begin your proposed budget deliberations. We'll hope it doesn't play out this way, but we have seen significant decisions made in the last evening. So we're just going to have to see. Wish I had a better answer.
Well,
So do a lot of other people in Annapolis. There's no answer right now.
I know, and I mean, we're looking at this, I just want Ted's view.
I guess what we can do somewhat is look at, worst case, best case type of scenarios, but there's so much unknown on this. I mean, it's almost best
And
not to
we're stuck
waste our resources and just say we don't know right now.
Yeah, and the problem is there are so many variables.
Yeah.
First, how much spending might they approve in this budget?
Right.
How much of that will go to the counties?
Right.
Of what goes to the counties, what portion will actually come to Carroll County? And, we can guess at it, but it would truly be a guess. But, I have looked at that in one sense. The current commission's cost estimate is $3.8 billion a year at full implementation, a number which I believe is going to end up being much smaller than the actual impact. But let's take that $3.8 billion for a minute, and let's assume that the state and counties are going to split that equally. I don't know that that's going to happen, but let's make that assumption for now. So that'd be $1.9 billion to counties in total. We don't have any idea right now how that will be given out to the counties. Again, almost total certainty that there will be some sort of wealth consideration, and Somerset County and Montgomery County are going to be looked at differently. We don't know what that's going to mean to us. But on that $1.9 billion, sometimes we can look at things, Carroll County as portion of the state, and 3% is often a good number. And I'm really, really hoping it's not a good number in this case, though, because that would mean $57 million a year for Carroll County. Our budget this year is $411 million. We're going to be talking about struggling to figure out how to balance this plan. Clearly, we have no clear path to picking up $57 million worth of new expenditures. And even if that's half of that, I don't know how we would do that. Carroll County Public Library, again, a little bit faster than the budget as a whole, but in the same ballpark. Visa EMS, this slide's a little busy just because there's a lot of things been happening in the last 4 years. Now, there was $1.1 million of increases planned in those 4 budgets. The commissioners added almost $500,000 of ongoing funding beyond that. There were increases in 16 and 17. In 18, there's actually a decrease. This was not taking money away from them in terms of money they could spend, though, but with our new computer-aided dispatch, we took responsibility for some costs that would have been in their budgets. So that $100,000 is just moving from one spot to another, does not diminish their ability to pay for anything. $1.3 million over those years for our self-contained breathing apparatus. This says one time, but we've gotten into a predictable but interesting situation here. There was an initial request years ago for the county to put up some money against a match to replace some of this equipment. Then it came back a second year to get some for some other companies. Now we've done it multiple times, and I think there are people out there now whose thinking is, well, the commissioners always fund this. So what started out as one-time funding is starting to look a whole lot like ongoing funding. We did give one-time funding of $300,000 to try and find ways to help recruitment and retention. We put $200,000 into the replacement of a reserve ambulance. And this last bullet is not actually in the Visa budget, but it's related to that. And that's, we've increased the planned funding for LoSAP through the operating plan. And on the expenditure side, I mean, the commissioners also improved, increased benefits for LoSAP. Oh yeah, and LoSAP, I don't know if the 2 new commissioners have run across this year, but Length of Service Awards program. This is a program to provide a benefit eventually to longtime volunteers. Sheriff, in fiscal year 19, well, I probably should have done these bullets in the opposite order. You've approved a ongoing 4% salary increase for the sheriff's employees. In fiscal year 19, you budgeted another 5% on top of that for a total of 9% salary increases. Now, the sheriff built his own plan with the money that was available there, so it's not that everybody got 9%. Some people got more than that, some people got less than that. Not in Carroll, the fighting the opioid problem, there were 5 new positions added to the sheriff, and then you added 10 positions for school resource officers. Now, of course, this was not in the last 4 years, but in our plan, there's also an intent to fund another 10 SROs in fiscal year 20. You made improvements to the detention center pension. We budgeted for housing some inmates in another county. That is not in the 19 budget, but it was in several years' budget. These are not big items, but other things you acted on, you replaced all their guns. We added tasers, truck scales, mobile speed trailers. This was not in the sheriff's budget, but at his initiative, we moved from one CAD system to another. You approved the training academy and also space at North Carroll High School to house the training academy. State's attorney, not in Carroll, 4 new positions. You added funding for a drug court prosecutor position. And this doesn't actually show up in the state's attorney's budget. It shows up in our grant fund, but you put a $65,000 match for positions in a state grant. Youth Service Bureau. We talked about how the commissioners asked them to take on responsibility for drug treatment services. We put in $125,000 in fiscal year 17 ongoing And then each year, we're adding another 75,000 ongoing until we hit $500,000 in FY '22. And not in Carroll, because the pieces fall in different places, I just wanted to pull all that together for a moment. In 19, you added another 300,000, which has been working its way to different programs. Ed Singer from the Health Department has been to talk with you on occasion about that. Then there was $1.7 million of ongoing. That's those 11 positions in the sheriff and state's attorney, the money going to the Service Bureau, and then the 300,000 in 19 that I just mentioned. Let's move on to the state budget for a little bit. This is not as interesting this year as it has been in many years. The governor did not put in a Budget and Finance Reconciliation Act, which is often necessary because the governor will need legislation to make his budget actually work. He didn't ask for anything in his budget that required legislation. Now, a BRFA has been introduced for other reasons, but not because of what the starting point for the state budget, at least. Now, as always, there's uncertainty. We have to wait out the legislative process. We were just talking about, there's always the danger. We don't actually know where we are until we're about ready to start our discussions. Their plan isn't balanced. And you look out a few years in their plan, and their expected expenditures exceed their expected revenues by more than $1.5 billion. Now, the state will always balance the budget, so I'm not saying that they're not going to get there, but knowing that that's hanging out there is always a worry, because we're often part of figuring out how they're going to balance their budget. And we already talked about this. So what does the state budget mean in Carroll County? Now, in the state budget and the Department of Legislative Service documents, they talk about aid to local government. As you've heard from me many times, we always need to remember that 85% of aid to local government is what goes to the public schools. It's not money that you get to make any decisions on. Other pieces go to the health department, the library, community college. Again, those are things you have no choices on. Less than 10% of what the state calls aid to local government actually comes to elected officials, you, the commissioners, and the mayors and councils in our towns. So in that aid to local government, though, Carroll County Public Schools up $2.7 million, or 2%. Not a lot of money, but a pretty big change given where we've been for the last decade, where state funding has actually been decreasing or flat. Carroll Community College basically is flat. Carroll County Public Library is up 3.5%, but that's only $37,000 to their budget. And as a reminder, as a matter of practice, the library uses the money that the state sends them for materials. So they're buying books, videos, CDs, DVDs. Health Department up $134,000, or about 7.5%. They haven't had too many good increases. In fact, if we go back to the bad times, the pieces of aid to local government that got hurt the worst were, number one, counties and towns. Number two was health departments. And there's actually some talk down in Annapolis of trying to restore funding to health departments to pre-recession levels.
It's one of MACO's initiatives this year, so.
Right. Now, if we look at the towns, basically what we're talking about is highway user revenue for maintaining roads and program open space for park programs. Highway user revenue, they're seeing an increase of about $600,000. Never forget, though, that when we talk about these increases, this is still far, far below where we were a decade ago. And program open space, flat. For money coming to you, we're seeing about $2.5 million, about a $200,000 increase. When I say far, far less, At one time, we were getting almost $12 million of highway user revenue. Police aid, essentially flat. Program aid, open space, essentially flat. And on highway user revenue, you've heard this before, but I think it's important to remind you that this has changed. Not only have the dollars gone away, but this is no longer a legislated formula. It's become this idea of a grant, not a competitive grant. But the key here is this can go away at any time. You don't even need to go through a legislative process to say we're going to drop the formula. So where are we these days? Look at our projected fiscal year 19, current year, year end. On the revenue side, right now, we're figuring we're going to come in about $200,000 above budget. We'll talk more about individual revenues shortly. Year-end projection in total, plus $200,000 on the revenue side. We still have $4 million in our reserve for contingency, although we have not fully accounted for the cost of the last snowstorm yet, and we are already bumping up against having spent that budget. So it's possible that we will have to start eating into the reserve. Hopefully not too much, though.
Have you spoken with Mother Nature?
She's not returning my calls. And we'll hope there are no more events ahead of us. Yeah, and part of the problem we face some years, we haven't had a big snow this year, but we've had a number of snow or ice events, and sometimes getting just a trace of snow ends up costing us just as much as having gotten 5 inches of snow. You end up doing all the same things. And especially when it's at night or on the weekend, which seems to happen so often, overtime is overtime, no matter how much ended up on the ground. Net savings of expenditures, this is our projection as of right now, $1.7 million that won't be spent. So we add up the unspent money and the revenue in excess, we get about $5.9 million at the end of the year. And we have that 1% that we always assume is available to carry into another year. Those of you who were on the board last year might remember I proposed trying to start backing us out of this. I think, its origins go way back beyond me, and for a long time, arguably, it might not be the best idea, but it really wasn't the problem. Now with our decreasing flexibility, I would really like to see this go away. The only problem is we can't make it go away without significantly impacting your bottom line, which is already going to be challenging enough. So 5.9 million, take out the 3.9 that's already planned for fiscal year 21. Right now, we would see about $2 million left at the end of fiscal year 19 that would be available for you to either park aside as savings or to use for some other expenditure.
It seems awfully lean.
Yes?
Pick that right up.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about the revenues. And as I'm talking, some ideas that flow through all of what we're going to talk about, the decisions that got made, the assumptions we're making, why do we look the way we look. One is there's always tension on the revenue projections between trying to be careful that we don't overstate our projections and taking money off the table that handcuffs your ability to make choices. Now, I would never want to put money out there for you to make choices that I don't think is a reasonable expectation. But there's so much we don't know. Our reasonable expectation covers some ground. And in many cases, I'm going to be making an argument to you, we should not be expecting more than this. But at the same time I say that, I can't tell you there won't be more than this. And income tax is going to be a really interesting one. And I don't want to get into it too far, but because I'm going to talk more about it in just a second. But what we're going to tell you, if you said, so Ted, are you telling me that it's not reasonable to think we might end up with $3 million or $5 million more than you said. I would tell you, no, I don't think it's unreasonable. I don't think we can count on it, but it absolutely could happen. Then there's this idea of the rebound. And again, this became much clearer to me this year as we looked at some of the numbers. Some of the information we have now that we didn't have a year ago. There were still places where I think, part of my thinking was, it's taken a long time, but it's still going to bounce back to something. There are places now where I'm saying, I think we should forget that idea. We've gotten the bounce we're going to get. And then the other thing is, there are things we know now that we didn't know this time a year ago, and combined with some things we learned last year, some of this is now leading us to say the expectations just have to change. So looking at our top revenues, real property, we budgeted 196.9, we're expecting 197.6, so a little bit more than we planned for. In our 20 projection, about $203 million. And you heard this from me the other day. Property tax, just in fiscal year 19, finally caught up to where we were in fiscal year 11. Now, that's not totally about performance. We do need to recognize the board cut property tax rates, so that was part of that picture. But a lot of it has been because we dropped and it's taken us that long to get back. Income tax, 148.8, we're figuring 148.8 now, but more to talk about there. 152.8 for fiscal year 20.
I apologize. You said the board dropped the rate. What year did that happen?
It was the 59.
12 and 13.
It was 2012, wasn't it?
It was two, they did it over 2 years.
So,
3 years.
Well, income tax was.
right, and that's my understanding as well. I think what could also help is if you go a little bit further back to where we are now. Have rates been dropped? And is that the first time those rates have been dropped in the last 10 years, 15 years? Where are we at, as far as any trends regarding the tax rates that we have the ability to influence?
Okay, well, the 59th board dropped property tax by 3 cents. That would be the first change since the mid-90s where they were actually increased significantly. And then they dropped income tax from 3.05 to 3.03.
Yes.
They being the 59th board.
Right.
So 2 boards ago.
And that's the only income tax decrease that I'm aware of.
Okay, and I guess in a nutshell, do you know why?
It's basically philosophical with that board. They believe that we should be making an effort to reduce the tax burden.
Okay.
And the property tax rates were reduced in FY12 and FY13. The income tax was reduced in 16 and 17.
Is it common for other jurisdictions, that you're aware of changing tax rates over years? I mean, is it like a, 2, 3 year, 4 year window? Other jurisdictions have changed one way or the other? I mean,
Changes happen all the time in both directions. I don't think you would find any pattern to it. It's
Okay.
generally reaction to discussions of the moment or something somebody wants to see happen.
okay.
And if you wanted to see that, MACO actually
Yeah.
has a tax survey they do every year, but they have years of history.
That'd be great.
You can see every county and all the
Yeah,
changes.
no, I appreciate that. I think that'd be helpful.
I think I actually have a copy of that in my
Yeah.
office.
That'd be cool. Okay.
Recordation, we're actually figuring we're going to come up short of what we budgeted. Talk more about this in just a minute, with a little bit of an increase in the 20. Railroad and public utilities and business property, these two revenues, we don't get very much information to work with. We're mostly reacting to what actually happened. So with railroad and public utilities, we've seen this growing a little bit. Business property, we've seen flat, sometimes dropping a little bit. And our investment income, we're looking at coming in right around budget with another increase for next year. We have seen rates starting to rise. We'll still have to watch and see how quickly these changes happen. And, there's another piece of this too. Sometimes our experience here doesn't change as quickly as the rates do because we have money in investments and we have to wait until they come free before we get the new higher rate. So this is now looking at how things have changed from your adopted 19 through 24 plan and what we are seeing now. So the first row, you see real property tax. So you see we're saying 400,000 lower in 20, growing to $1.7 million lower in fiscal year 24. And this, we'll be getting into more detail, but this is largely about the last reassessment in Group 1, South Carroll, coming in lower than we anticipated, and then us backing off of our expectation for Group 1 the next time they come around. Stormwater fund, we sold less debt than we had built into our plan, so this is actually good. This is money that was freed up. 400,000 in 20 and an ongoing 200,000. So net change in real property tax, you see down the bottom there, growing to $1.5 million in fiscal year 24. So the first row here is the last row of the last slide. Just carried that over for you. Then we add railroad and public utility and business property in to get you now a total property tax bottom line. So this is a little bit better picture, but we're still down $1 million in fiscal year 24 from what we have in our plan today.
Ed, go back a slide a minute. The ag pres, that no change there at all? I mean, just,
Right, this is about, we take 2.25% of our property tax to the Ag Pres program. Some of that goes to cash purchases, some goes to support the installment purchase agreements. Depending on exactly what happens with the installment purchase agreements during the year, could change how much money we needed to use there. This just worked out.
okay.
So the projection of Ag Pres really will not have any influence on any of this? Or any out to?
Well, in future years, if there are more IPAs than we planned for, it could, more or less, it could impact what this will look like. But right now, this is what we know.
Okay.
Is there any indication of how far out we'll reach, or was it 100,000 acres of ag pres? Is there any idea how far we reach that?
Well,
Three-quarters of
I
the
think,
way.
we might be getting 2,000 acres a year.
No, it's less than that now. Probably a little over 1,000 a year at this point.
Okay, so if we continued at 1,000 a year, you're still more than 20 years away. But it's never going to be as simple as that. Before we get that far out there, there'll be questions of, is there still that much ag land
Right.
to purchase?
Right.
Do people still want to be in the program?
Right.
Are we still committing our funding
Right.
to the program?
And
I was
keep-
just curious as to when that funding might be freed up once we reach that goal.
Oh, yeah, that's no part of our thinking.
I'll be dead.
yeah, and keep in mind that the 100,000 figure.
We could
was-
reevaluate it.
Well, no, my point is, that was just something they plucked out of the air. There
it
was
was
no
a third-
rime or reason to
I
100,000.
thought it was
a third
arbitrary.
of the land in Carroll County. roughly.
Well, but there
That's
still
what
was
they
no,
used.
yeah. They just hit on that without really a whole lot of formula or whatever.
There was no
They just-
methodology behind it.
Not really.
I talked to the people who did it, they said it was about a third of it.
Okay.
It's what they were shooting for.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it is. I think we have 330,000 acres or something like that, so
Yeah.
it is roughly a third. You can say something?
Keep going.
Okay, so now the first line here, property taxes, again, the last line from the last slide I showed you. Now we add in income tax, recordation, interest, and others. You see a lot of red here. This is what I was saying earlier, that we know some things now that we didn't know a year ago, and unfortunately, none of those things worked in our favor. Everything that we got more information, led us to say we're less confident of the projections that we had.
But we are AAA.
Yeah, well, AAA is not just about evaluating your revenue picture. It's about how do you deal with your revenue picture.
Right.
And they're all saying, and sometimes people will accuse me of being pessimistic when I'm talking about some of these things. And I tell them I disagree. I am optimistic. I believe we will figure out how to deal with it. We will make the choices we need to make to work through it. So talking about bad news is not pessimistic. It's just talking about.
No,
what you know.
and you're right, and that's an important point. That AAA rating is I won't say a subjective. It's both subjective and objective approach to how you're dealing with the budget, how we're dealing with our funds. So we are praised for doing that, and it's a very select group that gets that AAA, three over AAA. So you should be optimistic, and we should be optimistic, even though there's red numbers, that we will deal appropriately with these numbers. So, okay.
I'm going to talk more about each of these revenues, but you see big impact on income tax.
Yeah.
Recordation is really one of these places where I'm saying we've gotten the bounce we're going to get. We're trying to figure out where that might be, and I think we figured it out now. The money we're making on our investments, we backed off of that slightly in the future, just kind of reacting to how quickly interest rates are changing. But this is one, where I can't tell you with any confidence I know what interest rates are going to be in fiscal year '24. We're just trying to react in what we think is a reasonable way to the information we have. Then other revenues, that's a combination of more than 100 other revenues, obviously relatively small revenues. You get down to the bottom, and no getting around it. This is an ugly picture. We're saying in fiscal year '20, we think we're going to have $3.2 million less than what we thought we would have in '20 this time last year. And that grows to $10.1 million in fiscal year '24. So now let's talk a little bit more specifically about these revenues and why we think what we think. Yeah, and it's also important you understand, I deeply believe that this whole process, all of our decisions are driven by the revenue projections. The starting point is, how much money do you think you're going to have available? Which sounds obvious, but I can tell you a lot of jurisdictions, the starting point really is more, what do these expenditures add up to? How are we going to be able to fund that?
That's how the General Assembly operates.
But we put a lot of thought, a lot of debate into these numbers we're going to give you. Now, I can never tell you we've got it right, because we don't know enough to tell you we know what this number is going to be. We're trying to give you our best assessment with the revenues we have, and this gets a lot of discussion. During one discussion, Deb actually walked out on me as we were talking about this. She thought I was getting a little too heated with some of my questions. But,
Sorry.
But I just want you to understand, these are not casually arrived at. A lot goes into us landing on these numbers.
You like making people feel uncomfortable?
He owes you lunch.
No, I just thought it was useful to illustrate to you when I say there's serious discussion that I really mean that in a literal way. So property tax. Here's our history of reassessments going back to the late 80s or early 90s. Each bar is the assessment for one group, approximately a third of the county each year. And you can see, of course, how that's gone up and down over time. Those bars below the graph, that's us going through the recession, 5 consecutive years of negative reassessments. And no matter what anybody tells you, nobody could have possibly predicted that was going to happen. So one of the things we've been dealing with, at first was figuring out how bad can this get, and being wrong over and over again.
Right.
Then eventually we did hit the bottom. Then the question turned to, what's this recovery going to look like? And in those early years, I believed, because of how we had seen recessions before, I believed that it would come back more quickly than it did. You know, as more years started adding up, it became clear this is not going to be like other recessions. So that part isn't new. But what's become sort of new for me now, or more clear again, is the idea that not only is this not going to look like other recessions, but we're not going to bounce back from it in any time frame that we're planning for. The blue line is actual revenue collection. And you can see during the recession, we actually went negative. We started collecting less property tax one year than we had in the previous year. That's something we had never experienced before that. I mean, the world we lived in was property tax revenue will always go up. It might go up faster or it might go up more slowly, but it will always go up until it didn't. Now you can see things seem to have leveled off some now. And we're going to come back to this in just a second. But when I look at those reassessments, you know, property tax is driven by two things. What do the reassessments do to us, and how much new construction do we have? This is just about reassessments here. The shaded blue boxes are the year of an actual assessment, or in this case, projected assessments. So the only one that's actually happened is fiscal year 20 in South Carroll. We know that one. So then in 21 and 22, we're projecting 6.25% growth in the Northeast, and then in Westminster and the Northwest. 6.5% is phased in over 3 years, which is why you see 2.08, 2.08.
6.25.
What did I say?
6.5.
Oh, 6.25%. Then the 2.83 in 23 is 8.5% in South Carroll. Now, going in to this budget, we had figured we were going to get 10% in this last assessment. We got 8%. And we're still a little surprised by that. And when we built 10% in, we were not only feeling comfortable with 10%, you know, we even had some discussions of should we go higher than 10%? Fortunately, we didn't. But this is another place where I'm starting to question myself harder on, is it reasonable to continue to expect this rebound in reassessments? And us backing off from 10 and 23 to 8.5 is us saying, no, it no longer seems reasonable to think we're going there. That doesn't mean it won't happen. And it doesn't mean that we won't get to 23 and find out we had a 13% reassessment. Now, I can't tell you it's not going to happen. But given what we've seen, I can't in good conscience tell you, build it into your plans. Make your decisions based on that. And I tell you, even with the 8.5%, I'm not fully comfortable with that. The last 2 years, we had both assessments came in higher than what we built in. Not tremendously higher, but higher. But I think we can get pretty comfortable now with this idea that 6 or 7% is a reasonable expectation. Maybe that's also a reasonable expectation for South Carroll in fiscal year 23. And part of the reason I don't just drop it right now is, again, back to that tension between trying to act conservatively and handcuffing you in your ability to make decisions. If I felt with greater certainty that it won't be more than 6.5%, I would be arguing for that now. But I don't have that level of certainty. So each of these assessments is phased in over 3 years. You go down to the bottom. We blend the impact of the last 3 assessments, and this is also weighted by group, because Group 1 actually is 42% of your total assessable base. The other 2 groups are each 29%. So what happens in South Carroll has a bigger impact, good or bad, than the other 2 groups do. Then I said your property tax revenue is driven by what happened in reassessments and new construction. In here, the top row is the bottom row of the last slide, the blended impact of your reassessments, and then below we've added in new construction on top of that. So the 2.31 in '20 is actually 3% when you consider new construction. In fiscal year '25, the projected reassessment of 2.4 would grow to 2.84, including new construction.
This is commercial and residential?
Yes. And actually, about three-quarters of that is residential. Even at the relatively low level of growth we have now, the biggest part of our new construction is still residential.
Okay.
And it's an important point, because I get asked a lot about, well, we're having some good commercial industrial successes. What's that doing to the budget? And clearly it helps, but it doesn't help as much as quickly as people expect. And if you think about a $40 million project, which in Carroll County is a big project. If you go to Howard County, 40 million is not what catches their attention, but for us, this is good. A $40 million project generates $400,000 a year in property tax, and that's important. But $400,000 a year doesn't fundamentally change the picture for us. We'd need a lot of $40 million projects to say, okay, we've got a lot of money coming in, we can do some things differently. Okay, so back to that history, but now we've also added projections into the future. And if you look at that blue property tax line, you see it's growing, but not very much. That's because, it's even 6 years out, we're talking about less than 3% growth in our largest revenue. Now, you see back in around 2000, so we bracketed a few years there and said over that period, a relatively stable time, we grew 6.1%. And if you look at where we've been recently, getting to be a more stable time, you also see we grew 6.1%. What I'm going to say to you, though, is 6.1% then and 6.1% now
Not the same.
aren't the same thing. And at least two reasons why it's not impacting us the same way. First, back in that earlier time, we had a 10% homestead tax credit instead of a 5%. We were still riding off of some old assessments at that time that were helping to supplement what was actually being collected in real time. And the other thing was new construction back then was huge compared to what we're doing now. We're doing about 300 homes a year. Back then, we were doing 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 units. When I talk about adding new construction to the reassessment, if I had done that chart back then, you would have seen a much bigger change than a couple tenths of a percent. So we're growing in a way that's somewhat comparable, but your property tax revenue is not growing in a way that's comparable. So total real property tax. In 18, we finished with about 187 million. We're looking to get close to 192 million this year, and we're budgeting 198 for fiscal year 20. This is after we account for those changes for property tax that goes into the stormwater fund and into AgPres. So this is what you actually will have available to you to make your decisions. The top row is the forecast as we see it now. The second row is the forecast as it is in your existing plan, and then the bottom is the difference, which in this case is less money coming in than we thought this time last year. And again, the biggest thing that changed those numbers is the South Carroll reassessment, and then our expectation for what that means for the next South Carroll reassessment. It's not critical that you take in all these numbers. Just want you to understand there's a number of pieces to us figuring out property tax. You've got the big base, then you have your new construction, then you have the impact of the reassessment, then you have to take out the impact of the homestead tax credit. Now, right now, this is not big. I mean, it'd be nice to have the 400,000, but there have been times when the homestead tax credit was taking tens of millions of dollars off the table for us. Other credits, we have some credits we offer businesses total up to about $300,000 a year. And then other adjustments, what was other adjustments?
Penalties, interest.
So, you know, something might come out of appeals or late payments. You know, and appeals is another variable for us. You know, sometimes we see money in our assessable base, but somebody appeals it successfully and it drops back out of our assessable base. So all that adds up to this $203 million to $234 million you see on the bottom line. Income tax, our second largest revenue. This chart is our quarterly distributions. This is about 90% of all the money, and we see it in, it's not quite this simple, but for talking purposes, 4 distributions a year. You can see how this bounces around. You know, you've heard me say many times, this is volatile, very hard to project. And anybody who tells me they can draw a line through these things and find the trend is kidding themselves. The green bars mark the last 3 fourth quarter distributions. That's the last distribution we just got, the one we get at the end of February. And what's really important about that distribution is it's the last thing we see until after you've made all your decisions. We still have about half of our income tax to collect. So we're trying to tell you what to build your budget on, having seen half of a volatile revenue. And you can see, even with this fourth quarter distribution, 2 years ago, it was a little bit negative. Last year, it was more than 9%. This year, it was
Negative 3.5.
negative 3.5%. You know, what do you do with that? And it is rhetorical. I don't expect you to have an answer for me. All I can say is, you know, we do our best to try and figure out what are we going to do with this. Now, this last quarterly distribution, we only know this for the state. We don't know it for Carroll County. But estimated payments were down almost 35%, huge change. You know, this is almost certainly taxpayer behavior because of changes in federal tax law. And we've been dealing with this ever since the last presidential election, with expectations of changes in federal tax and then the actual changes in federal tax. And we don't believe, and I think this is true at the state level yet as well, that we have not seen the impact of the federal tax changes. So that could still be out there. And one of the reasons why I can't tell you we're not going to do better than we're suggesting, you know, the federal tax changes and what it's going to mean to income tax for us could still lead to an influx of money that we're not planning here. I don't know that, though. And I can't tell you with confidence, don't worry about this picture, money is coming. So 18, we're ended about 142 million. We're going to get close to 149 this year, we think. But again, I would not be shocked if this came in millions of dollars lower than that number, or that it came in millions of dollars higher than that number. We still have half of our revenue to collect. And we're forecasting almost 153 for fiscal year 20. Same kind of comparison for income tax. Top row is where we see ourselves now. Bottom row is where we were in your existing plan and the difference. And you can see this is a killer. I mean, this is change that we can't easily offset. And I really wish we knew where we were going to end this year. You know, if the quite possible better picture emerges, that changes this significantly, could change this significantly. And a lot of this is about what base are we working off of? You know, if we come in $2.3 million better, this bottom line changes. Yeah, and then in addition to everything else I was just saying, we did back off of our growth assumptions. This is another one where I think, this has been evolving, and we've gotten to a point now where I think we say we need to look at it differently. Historically, we felt comfortable with an idea that 6% growth in income tax over time was comfortable. Now, it was always a problem in that 6% growth didn't mean 6% a year. It meant 4%, 8%, 3%, 5%. But over time, that felt comfortable. We backed off of that in more recent years to an expectation of about 5%. And even when we were going through some of the bad years, that seemed to be holding up. And this is one of the things that's made it so hard to get comfortable with what to think about income tax. We're beyond those really bad years, but what we're experiencing now seems to tell us we can't even count on 5% a year, that 4 something seems to be a more reasonable expectation. And it just doesn't feel right. The economy, for all its quirks, is doing well. We're nearly fully employed. We're attracting jobs here. It just seems like income tax ought to look better than it does, but the numbers aren't showing up here. And when I thought about 6%, we backed off to 5%. 5% was good. Even in our worst years, things are pretty good out there. How can that not still be good? But everything we talked about, we kept coming back to, we don't see it. We don't see how we can walk into the commissioners and say, count on 5%. I can't show you why I would believe that. Recordation tax, now we dropped way off now in the importance of this revenue. Property tax and income tax are close to 90% of your revenues. So that's where the real ball game is. But again, because we have so little flexibility, because everything is so close, even a relatively small revenue still matters. This is a graph of the activity of recordation transactions and the average amount of those transactions. The pink line is transaction activity. And you can see we're on a pretty long road downward. Some of that is because we're not building as many homes as we once did. Some of it is because we don't have as many people moving into Carroll County. So you can look at some things, but I can't tell you that I know exactly how to explain it. And at one point, it looked like maybe we were leveling off, which, given the level of building activity, would seem to make sense. But now we're seeing 2 years of dropping. The 19 number is based on year-to-date information extrapolated to the end of the year. That could change. We have had years with recordation where the last couple months we saw a lot of activity. This past year, it didn't work that way at all. Now, transaction values are climbing over time, which is to be expected. Houses are still gaining value in Carroll County. So with recordation, actually, I'm going to show you a graph in a second. Let me hold off on that thought. So 18, we had an actual 13.8. 19, we're forecasting 14.4, which is less than we budgeted. And then 20, we're forecasting 14.7. So here's some history of recordation. And if we had gone further back, you would have seen a period where we were kind of hovering around 9, 10, $11 million of recordation. Then we hit the boom times. We went up to $23 million in 1 year. And on the way to 23, we had lots of debates about, well, how far is this going to go? I mean, how big can this get? And it went further than we expected. One good thing back then is we recognized this is not sustainable. We're not going to get up here and stay here for years. So we were never counting on all that money staying in. And there were actually 3 years. It wasn't just about recordation, but we had really strong revenue growth. We actually pushed $75 million over 3 years out of the operating fund budget and into capital to get things done in capital where you're going to pay for it and then you didn't have to pay for it again. instead of leaving it in the operating budget where, if you had added positions or taken on services, when that money went away, we'd have been struggling to figure out what to do.
And we don't have any more of that 75 million.
No.
That's all gone.
Yep.
Okay.
But then the boom bust, and we started dropping. So again, we were in this, how far can this go? And we went down to less than $8 million. We dropped from $23 million to less than $8 million over five years. Yeah, that's big change, and that's a lot of money taken off the table for you to be making decisions with. And I've talked about this other times. I didn't bring this all here today, but when you look at the change in revenue from the high points to the low points and where we are today, there's a lot of money that's been taken off of the table. And one of the struggles for us is we never really made decisions on reducing levels of service. We've been forced into a couple over time, but we didn't say, you know what, there's not as much money, we're going to have to stop doing something or start doing less of something. Which, when I talk about my concerns about maintaining levels of service and, stress on the workforce providing those, that's why I'm talking about that. So now we started seeing it climbing again. So now the question again becomes, how far will this go? And in the current plan, we had it rising to about $17 million at the end of the plan. We no longer believe that that's going to happen. When we look at the actual information we ended up with at the end of last year and looked at what's really happening this year, it's hard to make a case that makes sense. A year ago, I felt okay with it. Now, I don't feel like I can make that argument. Now, it's not to say we're not going to get to 17 million someday, or even by the end of this plan. If we were to see, housing starts pick up by 100 units a year, that's going to change this picture. But right now, I don't have any reason to tell you to expect that. So recordation, current expectations, 14.7 growing to 15.6. Second row is where you are in your existing plan, and you see the change. Investment income, pink line is what we're actually earning. Blue line is average rates of interest. Before the recession, we had never, in any history I had, we had never been below 3% in our return. Now we spent a decade below 3%, and we're starting to climb out of that now. How far this goes, how fast, is still a bit of a guessing game. We follow what the Fed does. We follow actual interest rates we are able to invest in. The Fed can change a number, but we still have to be able to put the money somewhere that gets that number. So this is rising. We've backed off a bit from our expectations, though, over time.
What are our investment vehicles? What are we invested in?
By law, we have very few choices, and they are all conservative. A lot goes into a government pool. We can get CDs.
Municipal bonds and stuff like that, or?
I don't know if we can buy municipal bonds or not.
Technically.
But you could have Rob come in sometime to talk more deeply about how do we invest our
I would
money.
be interested in seeing that.
It's actual 18, 1.5, forecast of 3.2. Now here you're seeing the market is changing. Actually, more than 200% increase in that year. Mm-hmm. And then continuing to increase more modestly for fiscal year 20. Same chart that you've seen. Not as big an impact, but still a little bit of a negative impact to our total picture. Building permits, this is not a big dollar item. We're talking about $500,000 now. But it's just tied to other things we think about in terms of how are we doing that I think it's still worth talking about. Here's some history. Now, if we went back further here, I think there was one year we actually maybe exceeded 1,700 units. We've dropped off and we're bouncing around 300 units. There's nothing happening that gives me any reason to tell you, expect this to start changing in some significant way. It could, but nothing that we have to work with. And, you know, and there are some fundamental changes from those boom years that probably will keep us from ever looking anything like that, even if we do start to do more units. First, our population growth has slowed. Second, there are environmental regulations now that didn't exist back then that make it a lot harder to build outside of public utilities. And for the most part, our towns aren't looking to grow a lot. So,
Yeah, so this includes our towns.
yes.
So the Warfield project, the 145 townhomes that are being built right now. Or years ago, when Raincliff townhomes were built, it was a significant number. Is that included into this, or?
We do not try to project new developments coming on. Now, as they come on, they get caught up in our new construction and then eventually into our accessible base.
Well, they're being built now, the 145. I mean, they're breaking ground, they're.
Yeah, but until they're on the tax rolls, they don't mean
Okay,
anything to us.
so this is finished product, when on tax rolls, it's included.
Well, this is just permits here, but when we're thinking about revenue, we're not trying to project revenue until they actually hit the tax
So why
rolls.
wouldn't they be reflected on this as far as permits?
They are, I'm just saying,
Oh.
I'm drawing a distinction between the permits and
Okay.
revenue.
Okay.
So yeah, as permits are issued, permit revenue is coming in, but again, permit revenue is
It's small.
tiny.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, you know, those that are being built now down in South County, or are they reflected into these numbers? And
As the
answer
permits
is
are being drawn, yes.
Yes, okay. Okay.
Here's commercial industrial permit. It bounces around, but I would say is relatively stable over time. This is a little less useful in thinking about revenue implications than building permits, because with houses, we know in a pretty tight range what most houses are going to be built for. Commercial industrial permits, you know, it could be $1 million project, it could be a $40 million project. The just number of permits doesn't tell you as much. So actual 507, we're looking for 560 this year. We added an extra 5,000 to next year.
Be careful when you get out on that limb, Tim.
Don't spend it all in one place. Basically, stand still. Now let's looking ahead to what your next operating plan, the one you will be adopting, will look like. I want to go through some of the assumptions. Now, there are literally hundreds of assumptions built into the operating plan, most of them very small. We're not going to try and touch on all of those. Just want to hit on some of some interest or of particular significance. Carroll County Public Schools, the last board had built specific numbers, dollar amounts, into certain years for school funding up through 22. The numbers the commissioners gave us are still the numbers that are there. In 23 and 20, or no, in 24 and 25, we built in the same 3% assumption that is standard through everything that doesn't have something specific. Now, whether that's where you want to stay or not is something you'll have to talk about, but that's what we've done now. Is that right? There's 24 and 40?
23 through 25
Okay.
is at 3%.
23, 24, and 25. We have a salary assumption of 3% a year built into the plan, with the exception of the sheriff, where we have 4% built in. There's a general assumption where there isn't some more specific assumption that gets considered first, that expenditures will grow 3%. I want to make a point here, because sometimes people will take the wrong message from that. We're building in 3% growth to build a plan to say, what do we think we might reasonably have to cover? That doesn't mean that all those 3% are going to happen. And in fact, when we come back to you with the recommended budget, you'll see that there are many budgets that are increasing less than 3%. So it's a starting point, but it's not a given. And on that point, it's worth mentioning, questions come up sometimes from people in the public. Even though we have a 6-year plan, every year when we take on the budget, we are evaluating every budget and all the lines in every one of those budgets and saying, does this still make sense? Is this still where we need to go? Can we afford to do this? I mean, a lot of what they spend months doing is working their way with the agencies through all these numbers, trying to figure out what is accomplishable within the money we have, and to the best extent we can, making sure people have the money that they need to do the things that you're expecting them to go out and do. And in many cases, we will put less in than was planned. But it's also important to understand there are times where the budget analyst will be saying, okay, you have this flat, or you even decrease this. How's that going to work? It seems like this is actually going to need more money. So there are places where we will put in money that wasn't requested, where it seems to fit what's actually happening.
Are these assumptions both one-time funding along with sustainable funds over the
Yes.
years? Okay.
In fact, if you dug into the guts of our out plan,
Yep.
and this is massive. I can't even guess how many cells of information are in all this. But, say we were buying survey equipment in fiscal year 20 for $20,000. In fiscal year 23, you would see that $20,000 coming back out again. So, and this is true even sometimes expenditures of hundreds of dollars. There's some places where we have to buy
Sure.
code books or something once every 3 years. And this might not be the right number, but we would put in $500 for 1 year, back it out for 2 years,
Yep.
and then put it back in for the third year.
But because we're getting into the out plan assumption, these assumptions are both sustainable funding.
I think everything I'm
Along
mentioning
with-
here is probably ongoing stuff. But there absolutely are one-time assumptions. Detention center, we have growing a little bit faster than our general assumption. That's because, first, their costs are partially drove by the size of the population, and they're also subject to prescription costs. The number of people, but the people you have sometimes drives their costs a little bit more than what we're seeing in other places. Intergovernmental, this is the money that you share with the towns. This is growing 2% a year. You'll be hearing more about this later when we start coming to you with the agreements with the towns. But this is largely driven by inflation and population. The total pot is driven by inflation and population. Population isn't growing very fast, and inflation isn't growing fast. So this pot is not growing fast. Debt service is tied to the bonds that we've already sold and to the bonds that we intend to sell. Of course, over time, what we intend to sell will almost certainly change. So this is what we know for right now. And this is always why when we talk about bond authorization and bond issues, why I'm always making the argument to commissioners, if you don't want to issue the debt, then don't build it into your capital plan. That's where the choice really is. Once you've said, we want this project to happen and we're going to fund it with bonds, the rest of it is just process. The assumed use of surplus. We assume every year that there'll be 1% left over. We've built it in more or less as a revenue. This is the place I was talking about a little bit earlier. I would like to get away from doing this. In the current environment, it's hard to see how we would do it. If and when we get to it, it probably will have to happen over a number of years. So it's not a sudden $4 million shock to our ability to balance the budget. Although, if we were to get back to a couple strong revenue growth years, there would be an argument maybe if we have $4 million we weren't planning on, it could be a chance to get out of this entirely all at once without hurting anything else. Reserve for contingencies, we budgeted at 1% of revenue. Reminder again for the new commissioners, this is money we budget every year. It's appropriated, it's available for use. It's not tied to any intended use. This is your during the year flexibility to deal with things that you hadn't intended to do. The biggest use of this is bad snow years. In most years, the reserve for contingency will largely remain unspent during the year, but all kind of things come up. Something came in more expensive than expected. You approve a position during the middle of the year. There's a unexpected grant that you want to provide a match for. It's just anywhere we hadn't planned for it, this is your place to go. Nonprofit service providers. Again, back in fiscal year 17, the board decided on different growth numbers for different non-service providers. This is something I think you might want to reconsider. Maybe you land exactly where you are, but I think it's worth some discussion. Is this how we want to plan? And particularly, I said, because with a number of them, it's become a pretty regular thing to do something different than what was planned for.
Right now, we have, I think, a couple of them are 3 or 4%, a couple are 1 or 2 or something of that sort.
Yes.
So we wanted to put them all at the same percentage.
I'm not necessarily arguing.
No,
for that.
but that's something I would like to see happen, put them all at the same percentage.
Okay.
I think if it's a 3 or 4, I think they all should be right about that rate, because I can't, in my mind, justify giving one of them 4% and another one 1%.
Yeah.
So
Right,
if
and
we
that's-
could put that into the figures for when we put it out there.
Yes, we can have available the impact for you.
Yeah, I am all about reviewing that and developing some sort of methodology as to why certain ones get X amount, going down to how many people they actually service. I'm not on board with the exact percentage of what everyone should get, but I think it should go back to how many people they're servicing. We have to develop some sort of formula how we
So
service.
the more you service, the more.
Potentially more money you could get.
Yeah, well, we do give more money, but it's a percentage of the increase of what we're talking about here.
Oh, I got you.
So HSP gets more money than Mosaic or whatever, but they're large orgs, so their percentage. But what I'm saying is, if you get 30,000 a year, and why do you get 1% increase instead of 4%, which someone else gets? That's what I'm saying. We already have it broken down to different agencies get different amount of money according to the population and the services that they provide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two conversations here. One is, at what level do you want to fund them? The other is, on what basis do we want to decide that? On the second one, I would suggest from the comments you've made that we look to schedule a session before you get into your proposed budget to talk about how do we want to go about doing this, so you're not trying to do that at the same time as you're trying to figure out what the budget's going to be.
That's correct, because I'm not convinced they should be funded every year, or the percentages of increase. So we need to have those conversations.
Yep.
So-
Yep, just in this short conversation, we can see things going different directions.
I see good copious notes being taken over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're taking notes too. And when we go through these sessions, we are trying to capture best we can things that sound like maybe somebody wants to go there or doesn't want to go there. We want this information. We hope this information is available.
Well, key to this discussion, this very, not even preliminary, the starting discussion, is you sharing with us, those are funds that are discretionary, those are funds that, yes, you do have these flexibilities to look at, and highlight that like you're doing now, so I appreciate that, because there are things, as you know, that they will be what they are.
Yes.
So, okay, thanks. Right.
The Ag Pres program, 2.25% of your real property tax revenue goes to fund Ag Pres. Then there's also $1 million a year of bonds. That's the match for the MOUth program that is separate from this. Now, in your current plan, the last board made some adjustments to that revenue stream to Ag Pres. So in fiscal year 20, as things stand, it would be 2.25% minus $500,000. Same thing in 21, and then 22 would be minus $250,000. That was done as part of balancing the plan. Board of Elections, 5% a year. We don't control these costs. I can't tell you it's going to be 5% every year, but this just feels more accurate than building them into the basic 3% assumption.
Well, there's some significant legislation out there that, you know, may cause us to have to fund more,
Yes,
So-
absolutely.
unfortunately, but it is what it is.
And, you know, going back to some of the earlier things we said, you know, this idea of Board of Elections at 5%, you know, what we're trying to do with all these things is make the picture as real as we can with the information we have. So that when you're making decisions to say, we want to make sure all 6 years are balanced, that we're not leaving out something that would either make it harder or make it easier, you know, that you're dealing with what we really think the implications are. Your pension costs are based on your salaries. So we move from one to the other. You change salaries, that changes pensions. Reserve for positions, it's $200,000 a year. Now, the actual amount is more than that because it grows over time, just like the cost you know, with salaries. But the underlying idea was, you know, $200,000 worth of room.
Do we still have that full $200,000 in this coming budget? Because I wasn't
Yes,
sure whether.
and
we
it's
still-
actually
okay.
about $230,000
Okay.
now.
I was wondering, because I wasn't sure whether they took some of that away from
Yeah,
last year.
we were just talking about that this morning. That was actually, in 18, you used some of the 19 money, so we were more restricted in this year's budget.
So we have 230,000 right now. Okay, good.
Our risk management costs, we grow at 5%. Again, this is just a general assessment that what we're going to see in growth isn't really in step with our general 3% assumption. And then, as I mentioned earlier, many other smaller specific assumptions. Things that we know right now that increased costs from your current plan, and there's really very little. Debt service is going up in some years in your plan, and it's really just about timing of some projects and when the bonds are going to be sold. At the end of the plan, it's still the same as it was. Board of Education debt service is up, career and tech primarily, but that's offset on your bottom line by revenue. We dedicate 9.09% of your income tax to the school construction program. When we take on debt service, we transfer some of that money from the capital fund to the operating budget. So that's a wash for your bottom line.
But debt service on the Career and Tech Center, that's, I believe, since you already built that in, that's not taken away from other projects that could be done. What I'm saying is that they can still do roofs and HVAC and so forth. That's not affecting those
Right.
projects,
It
correct?
hasn't changed anything.
Right, okay.
There is still, for the school construction program and how we fund that, there is still capacity to take on additional projects, some number of small projects, or maybe a large project. Whoops. And these next are really not big at all, but the point is, there wasn't very much that changed your expenditure position negatively. So, you know, there was $65,000, I think, to match a grant for the state's attorney. There were some ongoing costs for our new website that had not been built into the plan, but it was like $15,000. And then Veteran Transit, you actually just approved that increase a couple weeks ago.
And we should have a discussion on that before we get into the budget about how we want to lay that out in the future, because we did give over the $30,000 increase, something of that sort.
40, I think.
40,000 increase.
Right.
I was bringing it down, but no, $40,000 increase, but we have to look at where we want that to go and what we plan to do with that. I think we should have that discussion before we get into the budget talk.
That, you know, in terms of the budget process, that would be very helpful.
Just trying to be helpful.
You're known for that. Things that right now we know put your expenditure side in a better position. Fuel and utilities. When we build in our assumptions, we have fuel and utility costs growing over time. The percent growth gets higher with every year because there's greater uncertainty with every year. Fortunately, we've been having good experience in recent years. So we were able to back down on fiscal year 20 from what we had assumed. And it can be tempting to say, let's lower those growth percentages. The danger is these things can change, and not necessarily with any warning. We plan that way so that you're not scrambling 2 years from now to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for these increased fuel costs? And it's easy to forget, but there was a time when gas costs were high enough, we were actually planning for $4 gas. We're no longer up that high, but things change. Length of service award program, we added $1 million one time in fiscal year 19. And then we have funding ramping up. It's increasing every year in the plan. And the hope is that that's going to get us in the vicinity of what we need on an average annual basis to be where we need to be. Draw your attention to the third bullet to say, pay no attention to this because it shouldn't still be there.
Yeah, I was going to say, where are the three things?
I got rid of the three things. Our next actuarial evaluation, we should have early January. So with actual experience, with investment experience, with the adding this $1 million, we should have a better picture of where we are. And almost certainly will be better than where it was as of the last valuation. Just don't know yet. Is it better, or, okay, we're in good shape, or, what's going to come of it?
How often do we do those actuaries on the LoSAP?
2 years, 3 years? Oh, is that Heidi?
It used to be 3. I think they're looking at 2.
Yeah, we had that discussion, I think, so we could get a better picture.
I believe so.
About
Have to
2
ask
years
Roy.
ago.
You are very helpful. Wait, what? Okay, I was just curious.
Okay, so this captures those known changes that we've already built into what would be your next plan. And you see, it helps a little bit. Now, when I say known changes, we are still working on the expenditure side, and there are still things that might improve the picture. I don't want to give you any hope that there are enough changes remaining to make that revenue picture go away, though. We talk about debt service, a significant expenditure for us. It's about 10% of our budget when you look at all these things. We have county debt service, the top line, school debt service.
Is there a possibility of paying down less on the debts to give us additional money for this year, next year, and so forth? In other words, we paid down a significant amount of our bonds in the last, say, 5-6 years. I can't remember how much, but quite a bit. Can we, if we pay down less, would that give us an extra couple $1 million to work with?
We don't have any option to pay less.
Okay.
We've brought down the outstanding debt and debt service by issuing less. So we've just been doing less.
Okay.
But the amortization schedules are what they are. We know a date and a dollar amount.
Right, okay. I thought we were paying off quicker than what we had to, but
No.
we're not. Okay.
Remember, while we don't own the schools, we own the debt service. But,
It's a bonus.
yeah.
It
This
sounds like
is-
a bad marriage.
This is, again, any increase in debt service for schools is offset by the use of that dedicated income tax. So this doesn't hurt your bottom line.
Okay.
Ag Pres, this is where we are doing an easement through the installment purchase agreement and taking on a 20-year commitment. Stormwater, this goes into that special fund, but when we issue debt for stormwater ponds, that's what this debt service is about. And you total all
Do we have any additional money in that fund?
No, we balance it every
Oh, it
year.
balances every year, okay. I'm just looking for additional money somewhere. Go ahead.
Keep looking, Dennis.
I'm looking.
Your checkbook.
We've been looking too.
Go ahead.
So you see the total projected debt service, as we see it now, against what's in your current plan, and you see there's a bit more now than there was then, but most of that is offset by the revenue. So where does that leave us? This is the existing plan. And you can see it was just barely balanced. Exactly balanced in each of the first, well, in the second, third, and fourth years of the plan. An extra $300,000 in each of the last 2 years. For any practical purposes, we're exactly balanced for the entire plan. The good thing is, it is balanced. We did what we needed to do to say, we believe we will have enough revenue to cover the expenditures we've committed to. The value in that doesn't go away. The bad part is no flexibility. If something happens we didn't plan for, we have no room to deal with it, which is exactly what I'm saying we are now. The revenues are not going to be sufficient to make this existing plan work. Instead of just barely balanced, we're going to be unbalanced. Yeah, and before I go there, just a conceptual idea. This idea of balancing a multi-year plan, we're still fairly unusual. We're not unique, but we're still fairly unusual. Many jurisdictions do one of two things. They balance their budget year by year, and however bad this picture looks now, I feel very certain if we had been balancing year by year, our position right now would be even scarier than it is. We would have committed to more expenditures than we have. A lot of things can go wrong when you balance year by year. Sometimes with intent, sometimes just because you don't see it. And there are jurisdictions that have multi-year plans, but they don't balance them. They look out and say, well, what does this look like? But they don't react to the picture. Like I was talking about the state budget earlier. They adopted a budget knowing that the decisions they were making now were not supportable by the revenues that they believed they were going to have. As much as I don't like the idea of balancing year by year, I really don't like the idea of an unbalanced multi-year plan. It seems like you look at it, you say, we know this doesn't work. Okay, we'll figure it out later. So for me,
No, I was just to just provide an opinion on this. The success of this is the due diligence that's been provided, by you, by the county, and putting the resource, allocating resources, and getting it balanced this far out. The concern is, as we continue to do this, I think the success is going to be tied to having very well-established vision on the different programs that we want to achieve. So we're not having these ad hoc conversations and how to fund something like the $40,000 increase to the shuttle service. But for the shuttle service, and I absolutely agree with you, Commissioner Frazier, is that we need vision on what we want that shuttle service to accomplish. Therefore, we'll know this is going to be the cost of that shuttle service. Same thing with ag preservation and all of the very large line items that we have. In order to continue moving forward in a multi-year budget, that we're doing, that is something that I'm going to be just sharing with you, pushing very hard for, to establishing a very clear vision on what we want to achieve, because then once we do that, we'll know whether we're succeeding it or not. Because right now, if we don't have that clear vision, I cannot say whether the Veteran Service Shuttle Service is a success or a failure. I believe 100% it is a success, and I think it's a absolute requirement that we're meeting, but we need to have that very clearly defined in moving forward.
Yep.
So, great due diligence, great hard work where we're at. This is actually a good news story, to me, that we're balanced, Yes, we don't have the flexibility, but for the out years, I think we owe it to our community and our county to have vision, very clear vision to work through, so.
Actually, the Ag Pres is the only one that's had a vision throughout all the years, the only program that we really, I think in 1980, they designated what they wanted to see, and that's what they've worked toward, and that's
Yeah.
what we need for all programs.
And my comment about AgPres was not saying it did not, it's just
Yeah.
came to my mind, that's all.
Yeah, but I know, but that is
Yeah.
one, it's the only one that we've ever had
Yep.
one clear vision for.
But the importance of having a vision, goals and objectives associated with the vision will then allow us to know whether we're succeeding or failing.
And
Okay.
we're always in favor of clear vision and budget implications. Makes
Roger.
our lives easier.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so that's the plan that was adopted last May. Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't finish what I was saying. So, there's no getting around it. Budgeting with this multi-year balance plan makes your jobs harder. Balancing 1 year is so much easier than balancing 6. And that's where the value comes in. You know, it's harder because it keeps you from making bad decisions or allowing things to just happen without considering what it's going to mean. As I pull up this next piece, I mean, this is not going to be nice looking. And you're going to start thinking about what are we going to do? And it would not be hard to imagine starting to think, well, this is going to be hard enough without us worrying about balancing 6 years. Just balancing next year is going to be hard enough. What if we don't worry about it? And we'll think about it again next year. Of course, that's a choice you can make. I mean, there's nothing that requires you to do this. If that thought creeps into your mind, though, I would urge you as strongly as I can, push it back out. Even though this will make your jobs harder, I think it puts us in a much stronger position to say the decisions we're making, however hard they are decisions we feel comfortable we can make and say this is sustainable. All right, so let's pull the Band-Aid off. Building those revenue changes and the little bit of expenditure changes that helped you some, this is what the plan looks like now. And again, there's still some things we're working on the expenditure side that might make this look better, but it's not going to make it look good. And, as a percent of budget, these changes are not that big a deal. You're talking about 1% or 2%. It'd be easy to say, well, we ought to be able to figure that out. The problem is, going back again to the idea of, lack of flexibility. We don't have the places to just go and say, okay, well, let's change this, let's stop this. There are choices you can make, but I don't think there are any easy choices out there. Every choice you might make to say, here's how we're going to balance this is going to come with difficulties. I know what I was going to say. This doesn't happen very often, but my expectation is when we come to you in a couple weeks with our recommended budgets, we are actually going to be bringing you an unbalanced operating plan. The reason we're going to be doing that is I don't believe there's any way for us to balance this without actual policy decisions. There's no way to just squeeze here, push here, tug there, and make it work. It's going to come down to what do we want to do, what do we not want to do, how much do we want to do of one thing or another. So I don't like the idea. I don't want to come with an unbalanced plan, but I really think it would be inappropriate, given where we are, for me to balance the plan for you.
So this is where you make us feel uneasy?
Well, I expect that's already happened.
It's all morning.
Yeah. Well, for the three of us, for the last 4 years, you've come to us with a balanced plan.
Yeah.
So it's going to be all new to the five of us.
And a fund balance.
Yeah, and we do have, well, actually, I was about to talk about that. Unassigned fund balance. This is money that you have sitting on the sidelines right now that can remain on the sidelines as flexibility for the future, but is available for you to choose to use in a budget. This is just a little history of where we are. The relevant number for you today is that $4 million all the way to the bottom right. That's how much unassigned fund balance you have available to you right now. the pressures to use this are going to be tremendous. Just want to go back to an earlier conversation I had with you all. I think there's a lot to be said for us to be building our unassigned fund balance. And where we are right now is actually one very good reason for having a larger unassigned fund balance. If we were sitting on $20 million right now, I would feel a lot less uncomfortable about where we are today, because we have room to try and deal with it while we see what these last two income tax distributions are going to be, where we see how the next reassessment comes in. But $4 million isn't enough to buy us time. And there will always be years where having some money sitting on the side to be able to buy you time will be useful. And going back to our earlier assessment of the year end, remember we're saying what we expect to end 19 with will be about $2 million. But there's still a lot to play out. The biggest thing, of course, being income tax. Assigned fund balance. This is places where choices have been made to use money from previous budgets to balance our operating plan. So there's money from 15 that's assumed to be used in fiscal year 20, this next budget, $1 million. From 17, there's $4.1 million in fiscal year 20. And from 18, 3.8, that's that regular 1%. So that wasn't a special choice, that was just kind of business as usual. But $8.9 million of the 20 budget as it stands would be coming from what was left over in previous years. Now, we've talked a little bit about this idea. We've been doing things in recent years to make the plan work, using unassigned fund balance over many years, reducing in some years the money going to Economic Development Infrastructure Fund, reducing money in some years to Ag Pres, reducing money in some years to stormwater. Probably a few other things I have not thinking about. And any one of those things by itself would be an okay thing to do. I have no argument. And when we started doing this, it's basically what I said was, it might not be the best way to go about it, but just doing this by itself isn't a problem. The growing problem in my mind is this is becoming a part of an integral part of the budget process, and I think we need to move away from this. We're starting to depend too much on finding places to take money, and there's less and less of that money to take anyway.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, and it's understandable. If you're looking at 6 years and you're almost balanced, you just have a couple spots. You say, well, let's take some money here. It's getting more and more complicated as we move on. Now, one good thing this is the end of unassigned fund balance that we have assigned to a future budget. So 23, 24 aren't counting on money from a previous year. Okay, in case it's not already etched in your brain, this is back to that bottom line I showed you. Pending some more expenditure side changes that we might make, this is going to be our starting point when you sit down to consider 20 through 25. All right. So as if that isn't enough, there are other things on my mind, things I think need to be on your minds. First up on the list, this slide is the really big things.
As opposed to?
Kerwin Commission. This is going to be a big deal. I don't know how big a deal it's going to be. I don't know the timing of when it's going to be a big deal. But from a fiscal point of view, not talking about is this a good thing for schools or not. From a fiscal point of view, this is going to hurt. Whatever we're going to have to do, I mean, you just saw, not only is there not money to absorb new costs, the first thing we're going to have to do is figure out how to make up for the money that isn't there now, just if we want to continue doing the things we're doing today. People ask me how we're going to pay for this, and my answer right now is I don't know. Fire EMS transition. We've taken some steps. We still haven't started spending any new money. There are things that are going to need to be figured out. Money that's being spent today over here that will be spent over here and isn't a new cost. But there will certainly be costs beyond what we're budgeting today. We also need to talk about, the ambulance fee revenue. That actually, some of that should be shifting, which will help figure out how to pay for some of these things. But I don't have any hope that we won't have to find additional money beyond what's going to be available to us. Same place I am with Kerwin. Where is that money going to come from? I don't know. The revenue picture, we've just spent a good bit of time talking about this. This weighs heavily on my mind, and I wish we had a different picture, but that's the one we've got. School systems asking for $8.9 million. I know people could argue this. I'd say this is not an unreasonable request on their part. One problem, though, even if all 5 of you said, absolutely, we want to fund this request, this by itself is going to be more money than you are likely to have available for your entire budget. We would probably find ourselves, to fund this would probably mean finding other things where you had to fund less money than you planned to.
This is the total request of $8.9 million from us and the state, although, they're looking for $8.9 million. I don't think they're, hopefully not just looking at us for that money. That's what I'm
Well, I
saying.
guess that remains to be seen.
Right.
So, we have, do you agree or disagree with what they're asking? But even if you agree, then there's a significant funding question. Community college is again looking for more than $500,000 for salary increases. They're getting very little from the state. They are not planning to increase their tuition. So basically, the funding that you are giving them, or that you've planned for them, is how they've balanced everything other than providing salary increases, leaving them to say, now, commissioners, we need additional money to give salary increases. The sheriff would like to see improvements in his disability program. What that will cost us, if you decide to do something, what that will cost us will depend on exactly what you decide to do. But we are talking about hundreds of thousands a year of additional cost. How many hundreds of thousands depends on the details. So every one of these, well, revenue picture is really a little different one, but every one of these is the potential to add significant cost to that already unattractive bottom line.
They're already in the hole for $3.2 million, basically.
The state budget, what legislative actions will emerge that are going to have an impact on us. The federal tax changes and state legislation. When we were talking about the impact to us locally last year, we were talking about state legislation and what they might do. Now, they did pass legislation to somewhat lessen the impact, the positive impact of state income tax, and by ripple effect, local income tax, so that the federal changes didn't lead to increases in state revenue that they hadn't actually tried to get. It was a relatively modest impact, though. And I was arguing against us building into our budget an assumption that there would be a big boost from this revenue. One of the things I argued at the time, not the only thing, but one of the things was, well, what if people get really mad and start beating on the legislature and they decide to do a second piece of legislation to further limit how much income tax benefit there will be? Talking to MACO about this time it had been a little bit later, but after the state legislation was passed, their position was, yeah, it could happen, but we don't see them coming back to this. as people are starting to get the refunds, the voices are getting louder, and it's still on my mind that the voices might get loud enough that the legislature decides to do something more to limit what the state income tax bump will be from this, and of course that would then limit what it's going to be from us. So even now, that remains on my mind. Other reasons why I was reluctant to make use of it is, tax law changes, and people get to work figuring out, how do I best take advantage of tax laws? And I feel very certain that, the accountants out there are working for their businesses and people to say, how do we put you in the best position to not be hurt or to even take advantage of this? And different classes of businesses are impacted differently by this federal law. I think there's a lot of incentive for people to change how their business is set up in tax law so that they are either helped or not hurt. Like I said, we don't think we've really seen, even if there's money coming, we haven't seen it happen. So it could be that it's still coming. And again, that goes back to why I say to you, I'm not going to sit here and tell you there will not be a bump in income tax. It could still happen. Okay, that Kerwin Commission moved to the really big slide, so that shouldn't have been on the just things in my mind.
So big it's on 2 slides.
So just schools and budget request. We still have the East Middle School question, and I've said for several years now, nothing happening isn't really an option. We either need to spend money on that school, we need to replace that school, or we need to get rid of that school. All those will cost something. The idea of a K-8, which would be a replacement for East Middle School, is not in the plans, but still seems to be floating out there as not dead either. Modernizations and systemics, we have 40 school buildings, various ages, but they're all aging. We haven't done a full modernization of a school since, we replaced Mount Airy Middle School. Before that, I think you have to go back to modernizing North Carroll Middle School. What we've done is deal with systemics. We're still dealing with that. But we really haven't, I don't think, established a clear vision for what is our intent into the future for dealing with schools. Pre-K, part of Kerwin, be a significant expansion of pre-K. Are we going to need space? Can't answer that yet. The Kerwin Commission recommendations say that at least half of the services have to be offered by private organizations. Will that work out? Will it be more than 50%? How many students are we actually going to end up getting? Where are they? We have room in some schools to deal with this, but not in every school. And then proposed new construction funding. The governor is trying to set up a parallel school construction process that would be dealt with by the Maryland Stadium Authority instead of the public school construction program. Not replace it, but happen at the same time. I'm not sure how all that would work. I don't know if it's going to make it through the legislature or not. But another piece of this is, part of the governor's thinking is a very quick, big infusion of funding into schools to kind of catch up on the backlog. If that happens, another problem for us is they're not just going to fund these projects, they're going to fund their share of the projects. It would mean us finding our share of the projects, which in most cases is larger than the state share. If asked, where's that money going to come from? I can say, well, I know where a little bit is, but if we're looking for tens of millions of dollars, or even potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't know where that would come from. I already talked about this, but uncertainty about the highway user revenue. Talk continues about restoring that to local jurisdictions. That'd be nice. It's hard for me to imagine how that would happen. I'm more concerned about it going away than I am hoping to get more. Solid waste long-term plan. This is not new. We know we have expenditures that under the current arrangement, the fund can't cover. A couple of years ago, the commissioners agreed to bury more, reduce the cost of transfers out, and to build up some savings there towards some eventual solution. With all the rain we've had and the costs of dealing with the leachate, we have accumulated some money, but far less than we were thinking we would. So you need to be careful if you look at solid waste to say, oh, they've got some money piled up, but it's really kind of masking increased expenditures.
Recycling.
Oh,
cost
yes.
is the big driver.
Yeah, and recycling, where we one time made money on recycling, we're now spending lots of money on recycling, more than $400,000 a year now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about, we used to make, or we used to break even, now we're spending about $50 a ton.
So we saved costs and transfer, burying more in the landfill. We did buy a piece of equipment to do better compaction, so we don't think we're using up space as quickly as we once were, but we are using up space. You know, once it's filled, you can't fill it again. We had tremendous increase in cost of leachate and tremendous increase in the cost of recycling.
Would you say it costs a ton for recycling?
50, and that's the aggregate.
I didn't hear what you said.
$50.
$50
Oh,
a
50.
ton, and that's between what we make on cardboard and then what we're losing in the plastics.
Maybe I just didn't
So
want
are
to
you,
hear
are you saying that recycling is costing us money?
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
good, it's bad fiscally?
Fiscally, it's bad. Well, but you need to be careful. If you don't recycle, you still
You
have
put
to
it in
do
the
something
landfill.
with it. Either you're using up landfill space or you're paying to transfer it somewhere else.
So from a business standpoint, as a county, as a business, is it better for us not to recycle or to recycle?
We'd have to think about that. And we can try and work through that. I don't feel comfortable answering it right off the top. Just don't want to lose, though. I mean, we can look at it in a purely dollars and cents kind of way, but implicit in this has always been an idea that there is some value, not financial value, but value in recycling. That's an idea that the board can debate and reconsider if you want, though.
But also mandated to
Mandates, yeah.
recycle a certain amount, I think it's like 34% or something like that right
Yeah.
now, which is going to go up in the future, so it's not like we can
Yes.
do away with it even if we wanted to, and be clear, I don't want to.
Yeah, right, that's, you don't have total discretion, but you probably would have
We need
some
to put the
discretion.
straws somewhere.
We didn't use them, it was so easier.
Westminster Library
Might be going
fundraising.
away.
Yeah, we are part of a project to build the makerspace in the basement of the Westminster Library. This project is heavily dependent on their fundraising efforts. In bringing this up, I'm not saying that they're not going to make it. I'm not saying anything negative about their efforts. It just, from the very first time this came up to today, it's been a concern for me. What happens if they are not successful with the fundraising? And the answer for me is they have no place to go other than to you. The state is not going to increase what they're going to do. The money will have already been spent. So I wish them success. I hope they're successful, but this hasn't gone away as a concern
Do we
for
know
me.
where they are in fundraising? Are they hitting their milestones, or?
I haven't heard anything recently, but we can check for where they are. The artificial turf field, we have almost $500,000 in our hands. We're hoping for money from the state. If the state comes through with money, but not $500,000 of money, then we might find ourselves in a position where we have to come up with money we haven't planned on. Next Gen
No,
911.
that's not a true statement. The agreement, or what we decided as a commission, was to provide that $500,000 if there's the match from the state, $500,000. It is not, there was never any discussion on increasing any funding above and beyond that $500,000 from the county. And I do not believe there's an appetite to do that either. So it is that $500,000 would be allocated if $500,000 from the state or regardless wherever was provided, and then we would execute that money. If not, then that money comes back to us or stays with us. But there's no, I do not believe from any discussion I had with all of us and decision we made was to go above and beyond that $500,000.
Okay, and that's fine if it works out that way. But I just wonder if the state says, well, we're not going to give you 500, we're going to give you 250, will you reject the 250?
It's not necessarily rejecting 250, it's the then required match would be 250 from the county, but it would be the $500,000, and then we would have to come up with, not we, the county, but other means of getting the necessary funds. It may not be necessary to have $1 million, it may end up being 700,000, whatever it may be. But the additional dollar amount is not the county government's responsibility to come up with. It is other means, whether it's fundraising, the town, regardless, wherever. But I believe, from the discussion we had, an agreement was we would not go above and beyond that $500,000.
Right.
So,
That is my understanding as well.
Okay.
and I appreciate, honestly, I appreciate everything you're sharing with us
Cross that.
with these assumptions. You know, but the key is, as you're doing this, what's on your mind with these assumptions is once that assumption becomes a fact, let's make it a fact and move on. And so I appreciate bringing that up, but that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. Next Gen 911, we talked a little bit earlier. There will be, physically, we're in a pretty good position with 911 as far as, you know, the hardware and software we need to do things. There almost certainly will be an impact on the number of people we need, depending on what kind of requirements there are for retaining information. There will almost certainly be impact on servers and our ability to handle the information. Marysville 911 coverage. When we built our system, the digital system, it met the requirements countywide. But there's a small area of the county that isn't as well covered as most places. We do not have a project to do something about this project, but we've requested money from the state. So this is another kind of like what I was saying with the turf field, although you're saying that's not the case. In this one, we would have to come up with our share of the money to implement this.
I was under the impression that we had a mutual aid agreement with Howard County and West Friendship on coverage that is outside our jurisdiction, that we would be able to cover if necessary, and they have the same responsibility in Carroll County through this mutual aid agreement. I mean, I had a conversation with the Sykesville Fire Department, that's what I was left with, was that mutual aid agreement covers this concern.
It provides money?
No, not provides money, provides services.
Hey, we're not, you're,
Am I talking something completely different?
this is about the radio signals.
Oh, okay, I apologize.
We're not
Okay.
talking about
Oh,
mutual aid, who's
okay,
bringing
okay.
fire engine.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
I was talking
Isn't that
a
through a
completely
tower
different
in
topic.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Yeah, I understand. When I said
Apologize.
coverage,
No,
you
sorry.
took it as different
Yep.
It's
coverage.
about dead spots down
Yes.
there.
Okay, got it, apologize.
Right. So if the state comes up with money, they're not going to pay the
Okay.
full cost of doing this. We don't have any money planned for
Yeah.
this project.
Okay.
LoSAP we talked about. Space issues, we still have the North Carroll question. What we have right now was direction that we were holding it for 3 years, and then something was going to happen. I forget when that three years is. But right now, we're budgeting something more than $500,000 a year for that school. And this is really important. Whenever that 3-year was, we don't have that money budgeted anymore. So if we are going to continue keeping the school, we're going to have to find the money to do that. Sheriff, still looking for a headquarters. If we do not keep North Carroll High School, he's going to be looking for a home for the training academy. Then detention center, talked for years, at some point, we're going to need a detention center. There will need to be a detention center. We've also talked at different times about variations that could be part of that, a day reporting center, a minimum security facility, and the whole thing. As long as this list this really isn't everything on the mind. It's just
We don't want to know.
Fiber Enterprise Fund. Our expectations when we started this as an enterprise fund years ago for revenue are not being realized. At some point, we're going to have some conversations about how we're going to handle this. Technology needs and ongoing impacts in general. It's just getting bigger and bigger. And, it's not because we're doing silly things or making bad choices. It's just becoming a deeper and deeper part of everything that we do. Infrastructure funding, I came to you a week or so ago to start talking about this. I'm not going to spend any time on it today, but just the whole big, what's it going to take and how are we going to do it is still out there. Pressure on services, I've mentioned a couple times. Managing expectations. For anybody listening out there, I hope part of this is tempering expectations, and I understand, people want to do good jobs. They want the resources to do a good job. But it's not going to be as simple as saying, well, this is a good idea. I need the funding.
Our expectations along with the community's expectations.
Yeah. Reduced flexibility, we've talked about a couple times. So where do we go from here? Okay, in March, we'll be coming back to you on the 26th with our recommended budget that's going to have an unbalanced bottom line. In March and April, you will meet with agencies. They'll be coming in to talk to you about things that are not in the recommended budget that they believe they would like you to fund. General Assembly ends the 8th of April. Your proposed budget sessions start on the 9th of April. We have, maybe 20, 25 hours?
I'd have to check, yeah.
I think 20-some hours set up. Sometimes we don't end up needing it all. More often, we run into a situation where we don't have enough time. At those sessions, we'll be trying to give you whatever we can to help you work through things. And a lot of these notes we're taking will be information we want to have available for you. So if the conversation goes there, we're prepared for it. For the two new commissioners, a really important part of the proposed sessions is our ability to do what-ifs, basically on the fly. The budget office will have a lot of stuff on a computer, so there'll be a lot of things that you say, well, what if we did this? We will already have it in there. All we need to do is paste it in somewhere. Other things we might need to construct what you're saying. Deb does a pretty incredible job of keeping up with the commissioners and getting stuff on the screen so that you can see the impact of making this change or that change.
We'll have all the agency issue hearings before we get into our budget sessions,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because I was looking at the calendars. Okay.
One thing, just to get you, just to think about it, I'll remind you again when we get there, but as incredible as Deb is, she doesn't have unlimited capacity to get everything immediately into the computer. So sometimes we have to kind of slow you down a little bit and say, give her a little time to get this in. Then the proposed budget, your proposed budget will be released on April 30th. The next evening, or 2 evenings later, we'll start 5 community meetings to share the proposed budget. I go out to do these meetings. Sometimes commissioners attend, sometimes they don't. There's nothing that requires you to be there, but you can if you want. And when I go there, what I'm doing is basically telling people what's in the budget, what isn't the budget, sharing some of the thinking, how did we get there, take some questions and comments. They're generally not very well attended. Sometimes, we get some people, but most of the time, if I have 10 people, I think that's a lot. We occasionally will get 30, 40 people. Sometimes there's nobody. I've done presentations for one person on occasion.
He must not be very exciting drawing in a crowd.
I'm very excited. Public hearing on the 13th. We have time scheduled for adopted work sessions. So after you've released your proposed budget, you've heard public hearing, a little bit more time for you to say, is there anything we want to change? We usually don't end up using all the adopted time, but we get it on your schedules to make sure there is time. Adoption is on the 28th. The budget has to be adopted by the last day of May. And there isn't a lot of flexibility in this schedule. There are things happening up to when we start doing these things. There are constraints on when we can end. There are places in between where there has to be some time. So there's not a lot of room to work around this. Hopefully, all this stuff is on your schedule. You know, if you're scheduling other things, please make sure you're looking at this. One of the worst things, from my perspective, that happens is when we have a proposed session happening and a commissioner isn't there because they had something else on their schedule. I'm always left very uncomfortable when 4 people are saying, okay, let's move ahead with this. Then the next session comes and that commissioner is saying, well, wait a second, when did we talk about that? And it never works well. So no decisions today. Hope I've given you some things to think about as we head for the process. And again, if there are thoughts you have now that would lead to us gathering information, thinking through things, you just said something, I think we could figure that out. I don't remember what it was, but we will figure it out.
Well, you not
before we
being
get
that
there.
exciting?
No.
Can't figure that part out.
All right. That's what I came to do. If there are questions or comments, we can deal with those now.
The next time you should bring coffee and donuts.
We're not budgeted for it.
That got
It was a good kickstart. It was a good start.
Any additional questions or whatever for Ted? And certainly you can reach out to him.
And the calendar, you do have a copy of the calendar up there.
Yeah. We can reach out between.
You
now and
haven't
then.
made our morning easy yet.
Yeah, it doesn't stop with today. If you think of
I
something as
know,
a result
it's-
of what the presentation was today,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to reach out.
You know,
We got a lot of things to think about.
My experience, with the military, the Department of Defense has program upon years, goes out 5 years. So it works. There's templates out there. I appreciate you doing this. Again, what we owe more to you and others is that very clear vision and clear objectives on what those out years look like. So then we know whether we're hitting them or not. And that to me is the hard work, and then taking the budget and understanding where the numbers fit. So I appreciate it. Good job for you and the team.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for what you made him look good.
All right, next on the agenda is request approval for grant application acceptance of award for the Trevanian Terrace Stormwater Management Facility retrofit design. Your chief is going to lead the charge, Gail, and Kelly is with Gail. Kelly Martin.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
We are here today to ask your approval to go out for a grant application, and then if we're lucky enough to receive the award, we also want to ask for your acceptance to receive that award today for the Trevanian Terrace Stormwater Management Retrofit. And Kelly Martin is here to explain a little bit about the grant.
Okay, this money would be coming from the Chesapeake Bay Trust Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns program.
Man, I hate when you use the green. Reminds me of that stupid new green deal that they're coming up with in Washington. Maybe we
Blue.
could change the color or something.
Blue.
Yeah, that'd be better.
That's in water, okay. So we're requesting $30,000 for the preliminary and final plan design of Trevanian Terrace Stormwater Management Facility. It's an existing detention basin that serves 8 acres, but there's room on site to expand. So we're going to expand it to serve a drainage area of 188 acres, over 50 of which is impervious area credit. So Those nutrient reductions will go towards meeting the requirements of our National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. So in addition to the $30,000 of this grant request, there is a $35,000 county match, which is the concept plan development, which is occurring right now, for a total design cost of $65,000.
So the $35,000 for the county match won't actually cost us anything, besides
No.
the work that's being done
It's
into it?
being done
Right,
now, and
okay.
we are paying for that out of
Okay.
our
Paul, you said this is in part of our requirement.
Yes.
What is the total requirement?
That's the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit requirement.
And this goes towards that?
It does, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Any
Sounds
other
good.
questions? I know where this is, so pretty familiar with it. And it's in drastic need of something, because,
It's green.
Well, I think the most exciting thing about
It's
this
actually
is we
brown,
can
right?
bring additional drainage area into it and make the facility larger.
Right.
And the idea behind it is to incorporate an educational component into it because the school was right next door. So the school could possibly get some benefit from the pond as well, and that's the intentions.
yeah, so that's good. All right, any other comments? I'll make the motion that we approve the submittal of the grant application and acceptance of the award to the Chesapeake Trust Streets, Jobs, and Grant Program, okay?
I'll second it as long as it's green.
Hey, any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Any
you very much.
opposed? Thank you very much. So I need a motion to recess until 1 PM.
So moved.
Second.
Jeez, don't everybody jump at once.
We're all hungry.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're recessed until 1. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.